Olympus OMD EM1 3 Mark III. How they came up with that name, which was a long time ago, I have no clue. But it's a Micro Four Thirds camera. And if you talk to some photographers, they would say, why are you shooting Micro Four Thirds? Why are you not shooting full frame? At least crop sensor, right? That's the bare minimum. Well, I used to be a full frame shooter. I used to shoot Canon. Back here I have, these are old crop sensor. I sold my Canon 5D Mark II. But look at this beast. This is what I used to walk around and shoot gigs and weddings with. This is my, well, I think this was the first DSLR that I had. And it's the Canon 10D. And you ready for this? 6 megapixel. Yes, so I think it was 6 megapixel. Back then, that was a pretty, that was a real jump up from 3 megapixel. And look at the super large LCD you get. Anyhow, that's my old Canon. Then I went to the 40D. This was really jumping up. You got a much bigger screen. And this was like, wow, this is great. But old technology now. I'm actually planning on selling these. Been wanting to sell them for a long time. So let's go back to the Micro Four Thirds. In fact, let me grab my, hold on for 1 minute. So this is my Panasonic Lumix G85. This was the first Micro Four Thirds camera I had. And the reason I got it, actually, I kind of fell into it. My daughter was getting very active in volleyball sports and playing in school and clubs. And I got tired of bringing something like this and the big associated lenses with it. So before I got this, I actually got, I don't have it here with me right now, but I got a camera, actually, do I? Yes, I do have it right here. It's another Lumix series. I think it's the FZ1000. I don't even know if it's on here. FZ, looks like, sorry. When you get old, you just can't see as well. Alright, FZ200. FZ200, I guess. Okay. It goes back a ways, I don't remember them all. But I got this just to take. It's got a wide to zoom lens on it, 25 to 600 millimeter. Wow. So I could take this and get shots of volleyball and all of that. And, to be quite honest, it did pretty good. It was pretty decent. It was pretty good. But it just wasn't quite what I wanted. I mean, certainly at higher ISOs it was noisy, but not bad for what you get out of it. And so my next thought was, well, if I could get a camera with the quality, image quality, in between this and my 5D Mark II, something in between, I would be satisfied. So I got the Lumix G85 Micro Four Thirds, and I have over here, which I think it's out of the camera view, and I didn't buy all the lenses at once, but I think I got that lens, and then I got this tiny 85 millimeter f1.8. So let's put this on here so you can see what it looks like. have anything equivalent for full frame. I sold it all. But a lot of you will know an 85 1.8 on a full frame camera, it's just big. It would look about maybe a little fatter, but almost as big as this. It'd be a little fatter than this, maybe a little shorter, versus this tiny thing. So something was wiggling. We're good. So I thought I'd give it a try. And I was very, very pleased with the results I got from it. Of course, I read all the reviews and I read what people were saying, so I had a pretty good baseline to go on. But what I did is I actually shot some side-by-side images with my 5D Mark II and this camera. And I was blown away. Even pixel peeping. It was much, much, much closer. And actually, in a lot of my images, I was, particularly portraits, I was seeing more detail. Eyelashes just seemed to look consistently sharper. Even just fine hairs on people's faces. Like, wow, I don't, you know, my Canon just didn't really record that quite as well. I mean, sometimes it would. But it was just consistently, I thought, just overall. Now, I'm sure you could go through the technical aspects and do ISO and really go down and do a more scientific comparison. And sure, hands down, the 5D Mark II would beat the Micro Four Thirds in a lot of areas. But there are a lot of areas I would say that this surpasses. I mean, one thing, the sensor is much newer technology than the 5D Mark II, so it's got that advantage. You know, it's a much newer, so sensors have gotten a lot better since they made the 5D Mark II. But anyway, I was using the 5D Mark II as my baseline, and I was very impressed. Just about all my shots I would do with my 5D Mark II, I would end up sharpening just about every picture. In fact, I'd had macros I'd run and sharpen every image to get the finish, you know, just to get a little bit extra sharpness on that. I found with my Micro Four Thirds that if I started sharpening, it was over sharpening. I'm like, wait a minute. I don't need to sharpen these. They come right out of the camera tack sharp, very detailed. So as a rule of thumb, I might sharpen 1% of my pictures now. And I remember reading or watching a lot of YouTube videos from some of the big name people on how to get sharp images, and a lot of them would say, you know, we sharpen every picture, and they would show you techniques on sharpening and do this in Photoshop and do that, and all that went out the window when I got the Micro Four Thirds. I hardly ever sharpen any image. In fact, I'll sharpen an image if I happen to miss focus, or I didn't have quite the depth of field that I needed, and somebody in the background is a little out of focus. I need to, you know, over sharpen a little bit just to make it look like he's sharper or she's sharper. That's when I screw something up. But it doesn't happen very often, fortunately. And then you got the nice flippy screen, you got all the, you know. So I really fell into Micro Four Thirds, really liking it. Well, I also dabbled into the Fuji, which is what I'm filming with right now, the X-T2. And it's a crop sensor, so it's a step up in sensor size. And I've actually done comparisons. My latest purchase right now, and where did I put it? Right here, is this. my Olympus EM1 Mark III, and love the camera. It's got some great features. I'm not going to go into a comparison of between this and the Panasonic, but it's you can do all that yourself. But the main point I want to point out is you hear some photographers say, "Oh, I only shoot full frame." You know, you just can't get the bokeh. You can't get, you know, you can't get that full frame look on a Micro Four Thirds. And I'm going to tell you, nothing could be further from the truth. You use the right lenses. I have an 85 1.8, which is on this. I have this. This is a equivalent to an 80 to 300 millimeter. Now, some of you, or a lot of you, will know that a 70 to 200, which I used to have, I sold. It actually came in its own carrying bag. That's how big it is and how heavy it is. It actually has its own bag that you carry on and you put it on your shoulder. Very hard to fit in my camera bag. In fact, it wouldn't fit in my smaller bags. So that's what I was dealing with. But here's a 80 to 300 equivalent, 2.8. And I know some other people are going to say, "Oh, you're talking about equivalent, and that's really, you know, because of the small sensor size, that's not a 2.8. Well, yes, it is a 2.8. It's a 2.8 in exposure size. You know, I know you'll argue, "Oh, that's really a f5.6, but it's 300 millimeter. I had this zoomed in all the way. I'm shooting far back. I got my lights close to my subject. Let me tell you, I blow out backgrounds. I have trees in my yard. I have distracting backgrounds, and I've made them look like very pleasant studio backgrounds. So this is a very nice lens. Another lens I have, which I love, is the Olympus 75, equivalent 75. And this is a 1.8, and again, not too big. Very nice lens. Metal too. Actually, I dropped this one at one of my daughter's volleyball game. Put a nice little dent there, but it works perfect. No problems with it. But all metal. I mean, it's got some good weight to it, but it's not too heavy. Another lens I shoot with is the equivalent. This is a 160 1.4. So I can blow out some pretty good on that one. And then one of my newest lenses, which I absolutely love. This is actually a Panasonic. And it actually has an aperture ring on it, like the Fujis do. You can actually change the aperture. Although the only caveat with that is you can only do that on a Panasonic. When it's on my Olympus, I have to keep it on the auto, and then I can manually change it or let the camera change it. But yeah, this does not work on the Olympus, but it works on the Panasonic. This is actually a video lens, and it's a clickless, so you can transition very smoothly. So I don't need that feature really. But this is an equivalent 20 to 50 f1.7. So that's a pretty good size. You're not going to find an f1.7 in this focal length, in this zoom range, on a full frame or a crop sensor. It's the only one I know of. And that's why I love it. It shoots nice and wide all the way down to 20 millimeter. Okay, I'm back. Little disruption there. Anyway, where was I? Comparing the difference between JPEG and RAW. So yeah, so going back to where I was, Um, so when I do my normal workflow, because that's what I want to base it on, I mean, it's good to say, oh wow, when you look at the RAW, and by the way, the RAW by itself, no one uses a RAW and say, hey, here you go. One, they're too large. Second, you want to process them, do your stuff on it, whatever it is, and then your output's a JPEG. So when I do that process, the difference between the two becomes less. And I didn't realize that would happen, but by me experimenting, and because I have both cameras, that's what I would do, is open them up and say, oh, okay. And then I would process them to make them look very, very identical or very, very, very similar. And then I would zoom in on them and be like, oh, I actually see less of a difference. So when you look at tools like that and you see, what you want to judge it, and your workflow might not be Lightroom, it might be something else, but I'm doing what my workflow is. And the raw images, the highlights, I have a lot of control over them. I haven't had dynamic range problems with any of my images, so I guess what I'm saying is I'm a very big fan of Micro Four Thirds. I was actually in the camp a long time ago where when I went to the Canon 5D Mark II full frame, I thought I would never go back to crop sensor. I thought I would never. And part of that actually was when you went traditionally back in the film days, let's go back to that, all cameras were full frame. It was 35 millimeter. And all your lenses were based on 35 millimeter negative size. So a 70 to 200 was always a 70 to 200. Didn't matter what body you put it on, because a 35 millimeter negative was a 35 millimeter negative. Well, now we have all different size sensors. We have 1 inch, we have very tiny, we have ones that are a speck, size of a speck on your cell phone. We have, probably tens of 20s, 30s, I don't know, all different types of size of sensors now in cameras. So you go back to digital SLR, they came out with crop sensors. It was cheaper and a lot easier to work with. So they started out with crop sensors. And that meant that your 50 millimeter lens was no longer a 50 millimeter lens. It was 1.5 times the 50. It was a 75 now. So now your lenses that you bought now have converted to some other focal length, and that was kind of the issue of having a crop sensor versus full frame. And then when you bought the full frame, now your lenses went back to what they were. Well, now you buy a Micro Four Thirds. All the lenses or Micro Four Thirds are meant for this sensor size. They don't go on other type of cameras from larger sensor size. So it doesn't matter if I buy another Micro Four Thirds. That lens is always going to be what it is. So my lens lineup, and yes, they'll say what's equivalent, because obviously their focal length is going to be different because of the sensor size and the distance away from the sensor. But so now I don't have when I go back down to my crop sensor camera, now I have this problem. That doesn't happen anymore. So I got my little case here, but hold on for 1 minute. Let me just swing the camera, and I see it's a little dark, so what I'll do is bring it in over here. So one of the things I have done now is I have gone to hard case, and I can fit my Micro Four Thirds bodies in here, 3 of them. and I got a little bit more space, and I have all my important lenses and some other things. And then I have a setup for all my lighting and modifiers. Which reason I show you that is I can fit 3 bodies. I can fit 6 or 7 lenses, maybe 8 lenses in that. And that's not a real big case for me to bring. And that's more than enough to shoot a wedding. That's plenty. I may only use 3 of the lenses, but I bring all of what I have because I never know what I'm going to run into. And then I'll bring another case that has all my lighting equipment and tripods and light stands and all that. So if I were shooting full frame, number one, I might be able to get 3 bodies in that, and maybe because of my 70-200, that's a real important lens, and an 85, that might be about it. So when I go to a wedding, I don't have all this. Back when I was in my 20s and 30s, I liked carrying a lot of equipment, heavy, and it was fine. But now that you're getting closer to your mid-50s, it's a real godsend to have lighter, smaller, more portable equipment. And overall, and especially with the new camera, it hands down beats my 5D Mark II. I would not, even if they could shrink the 5D Mark II back down to the same size, of all the sensor technology and all the advances they have on the camera, I wouldn't take the 5D Mark II. So, anyway, I don't want to ramble on too long for this, so I will do another video on another topic later. Thank you.